Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Washington Tuesday for his first face-to-face meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, this was a high-stakes meeting for the Prime Minister as Canada's relationship with the U.S. is at its lowest point in decades. So walk us through this. How did the public part of the meeting go?
About as well as you could hope. Nothing went off the rails. There was no Zelensky moment with Carney being kicked out. They held a news conference and then they went to lunch. If you recall, Zelensky didn't make it to lunch, and the lunch they had set out for the Ukrainian delegation and the Americans was fed to young White House staffers. They made it to lunch. That's a good thing. Started off with Donald Trump being very complimentary to Mark Carney, talking about what a great election he had. This guy came up through the ranks. Well, he didn't really. So Trump was saying a lot of things that weren't quite accurate, but praising Carney while doing it, saying he watched the debate and thought he did a really good debate performance. And then, Carney returned the favor, talked about how Trump was a transformational president, that he wanted to work with him. And my government will have a bigger focus on the economy and on our defense and securing the Arctic, and fentanyl, all things that are music to Trump's ears. So it started off with them praising each other, complimenting each other. And then, of course, you get into the weeds and things like 51st State and trade irritants. And, they were able to keep it on track, though.
Now, you mentioned 51st State because Trump continues to taunt Canada with his 51st State remarks. So how did Carney handle that?
So it came up from a reporter asking the question. Trump did not raise it directly, but when asked about it, it's interesting. It was a very different take than we've seen from him before. He said, well, I still think it would be good, but it takes two to tango. And if both sides want to do it, we'll talk about it and we'll go forward. But that's not what we're here about. But I still think it'd be really good for Canada. I still think, this would be great for the Canadian people. Mark Carney just calmly said, Mr. President, there are some places that are never for sale, like the building we're in right now, the White House or Buckingham Palace. And he said, I can tell you, having spent the last couple months talking to the owners of Canada during the election campaign, Canada's not for sale. And, we're not interested in the 51st state. It was handled fairly well. Like, I think Mark Carney did the best job he could in the situation throughout the back and forth with the media, kind of a freewheeling scrum as they're sitting there in the Oval Office. The issue did come back a couple of times, and Trump said never say never, and maybe we can find a way. But that was a point where it really could have gone off the rails, and it didn't. Towards the end on trade, that's where things got a little bit dicey.
Okay, yeah. So then let's talk about that because tariffs and trade were major topics that needed to be discussed. However, here in Alberta, the biggest impact on our economy isn't tariff related, it's the price of oil. So has Carney given any indication of making moves that could see Alberta get a better price on oil in the future?
Donald Trump did talk about oil and the energy that both countries have and how, tremendous that is. We didn't hear from Carney in the meeting about that. I have not seen him say anything that would lead me to believe that he is going to take his focus off clean energy. Throughout the election campaign, we heard him talk about making Canada an energy superpower in conventional and clean energy. He really didn't like using the words oil, gas, or pipeline. I think given the political climate, Mark Carney and his team would be very smart to offer some kind of olive branch to Alberta. He's got to bring down the temperature on Alberta separatist sentiment, and I know the vast majority of Albertans are not there yet. But you don't want to let that fester to where it goes from 20, 25, 30% to 40, 45, 50%. You don't want it to get there. And it's incumbent upon any prime minister to focus on national unity. And right now, issues of national unity need to be dealt with in the prairies, in Alberta and next door in Saskatchewan. By the way, everyone's talking about you guys. The latest polling I saw showed more people in Saskatchewan ready to bolt than in Alberta. Not by much, but a little bit. So The prime minister needs to be able to go in and offer something, whether that is a pipeline or if he's not going to get rid of C-69, because I've talked to some liberals that say, no, no, we still need that there so that we can deal with First Nations issues and get the projects through the courts. Okay, well, if that's what it is, then map out your changes to C-69 and map out which pipelines you will approve and how you will approve them. Start talking about the demands that Premier Smith made. I was looking at the spot price of oil, and Western Canadian Select down at $44 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate in the 50s. A little while ago, those were trading at $80 and $70 respectively. That was within the last year. That was within 8, 9 months. That's a tremendous hit to the Alberta economy, which means it's a tremendous hit to the Canadian economy. Making those overtures and offering the olive branch, that would help the Canadian economy.
Right. Now, the latest thing that Trump has been lamenting about is movies being made in places other than Hollywood. Now, he's talking about a tariff on movie production. How exactly would that work? And would it just cost Canadians more to go catch a flick?
I, well, would I'm not sure, and he is talking about it a lot, but he hasn't given any details. And Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, has talked about it. Why are films produced elsewhere? He said with his gravelly voice on Larry Kudlow's show. Uh, so, okay, we've got little movie hubs all across Canada. We've got them across the United States. Part of the reason for that is all the movies used to be shot in New York and Hollywood and became very expensive. It was tough to find the crews to be able to, staff the movies. They added regulations and red tape and permits and just made it impossible. And so the movie industry is now spread out all over. So would they say if you shot a movie in Alberta, let's say, or like the Last of Us TV show was shot there, or the movie Remnant, if that's shot there, do they then say, well, if you want to show it in America, you're going to pay a tariff on all the expenses of the Canadian crew? Because I doubt they would consider the salary of the American star living in Beverly Hills paying U.S. taxes to be something that you're going to tariff them on. But they might tariff the cost of everything that was spent in Canada on the cruise, on the catering, things like that. Basically, just try and make it more expensive so that you force production back to the United States. But this is a very strange one, but one that seems to have caught the president's attention. I think he even mentioned it in the meeting with Carney. We'll see if find out later if he discussed it over lunch with him.
All right, now back to Canada. Most Canadian auto parts are still being exempted from American tariffs, but not vehicles. So how big has the layoff impact been so far?
It's between 1,500 and 2,000 people laid off. That's at the Stellantis plant, the old Chrysler plant. They make the Chrysler Pacifica, the minivan. They make the Dodge Charger there. And the General Motors plant in Oshawa, a few hours drive away, where they make things like the Chevy Silverado. So, yeah, in terms of GM, that is almost exclusively related to the tariff issue. In Windsor at the Stellantis plant, it's a combination of the tariffs, but also they're retooling their line for the upcoming production of the new models. But the tariffs are making it that much more um, things are not stable. It's unstable in terms of how things will go forward. So it is really hurting. And then of course those have knock-on effects on the parts makers. So right now the Stellantis plant, it's a 1 to 2 week layoff there. They've lost an entire shift at the General Motors plant. So that's 750 workers there, 750 in Windsor. You don't want it to go down to from 3 to 2 to 1 shift at a plant like that, because if you start going in that direction, the whole plant just closes.
Now, we should also shed some light on the tariffs on pork and canola imposed by China, as they don't get the same kind of attention on auto tariffs. So any chance those could be lifted soon?
So those are with China, and it's in retaliation for our tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. And I understand Premier Smith's frustration on that front, because uh, we imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to protect the electric vehicle market, that's just starting to grow in Ontario. And she says, well, it's non-existent, and we've got real jobs that are at stake. And so China retaliates with uh, tariffs on canola and pork. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that the reason that the tariffs were put on, it started with the Biden administration, and we had to follow suit not to be offside of them. And Trump has kept them in place. And if we go offside of Trump on that, we're going to be, facing tariffs on all kinds of goods. And so, yeah, it's painful. And hopefully for the canola farmers, they can find different markets. But I'm not sure that we're going to see a solution on that anytime soon. China's entire economic strategy, whether it's EVs or something else, is to go in, flood the market with cheap product, get you addicted to it, and then make sure that they're the dominant one. And if we allow that to happen, there will be zero auto industry in North America. And that's why the Biden administration, followed by Trump, said, we're doing this and you have to follow. If we lift those EV tariffs to get the canola tariffs off, we're in for a whole heap of trouble from the Americans on a number of other fronts.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre met with his caucus today, and from what I understand, there's no real attempt to push him out, but the party does need to find an interim leader in the House of Commons for the spring sitting because Poilievre is obviously no longer an MP. How safe is Poilievre in his position as Conservative leader?
It is only going to be about 3 weeks of sitting, and based on timing, we should see Pierre Poilievre back in the House of Commons in time for the September sitting, and he will be representing an Alberta riding. We assume by then, Battleford Crowfoot, I believe it is. Sorry, probably Battle Creek Crowfoot. I've got the name wrong there. Yeah, and he was out visiting there. He was in Consort, Alberta, the other day, meeting with Damien Crook and his team. Went to Crook's family farm, met the campaign staff. He's looking forward to that. It appears that he's safe for now, but you have to remember that when the Conservatives lost the 2019 election, that was October 2019, wasn't until December that Andrew Scheer was gone. Things started dropping in November and into early December, and then Scheer took the decision to step down. I remember going to chat with him in his office, and I could tell at that point that he was going to leave. Aaron O'Toole, he lost the election in September 2021. He wasn't taken out until February 2022. So we could see something happen, but we're just over a week since the election. I haven't been receiving phone calls from high-ranking members of the party saying Pierre's got to go. You haven't seen people organizing yet. If we see those things happen in the next few weeks, he could be in trouble. At this point, he seems to have the support of the caucus and the grassroots, and that's what any leader needs.
We're almost out of time, but I want to squeeze in one more question because you've written about infighting in the Conservative camp, and it's just over a week since the election, and I'm curious if there's any signs it will get better.
Well, Jamil Jivani, Conservative MP, was just out doing another interview talking about Doug Ford and how Doug Ford is the problem. Ford and Jivani have a personal animosity, and that's what it is with so much of these. It's personal relationships that have gone sour. And so my advice in my columns and in phone calls with people is you got to put that aside. If you want to keep on fighting, you're not going to win. You've got to put that aside. I think once the dust settles with Pierre and his by-election, I think or maybe even before then, I think you're going to see him try and, if he's smart, meet with people like Doug Ford, meet with people like Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, with Peter MacKay. Try and build bridges with the different parts of your coalition that you need, because they froze a lot of them out at the federal level over the past 2 years because they were riding so high in the polls. And then when things tightened up and they needed them, those folks weren't there. You want them on your side. You want everybody working to get you elected. Let's hope that that's how they operate going forward.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.